We do have one bonus speaker who's going to be talking about challenges of national and organizational culture. So Ying Kwong has asked me to come up and talk about this. He's a longtime contributor to PNSQC and written several papers, and I'll let him expand.
Thank you very much. This is very much agile agenda development. I saw some of the presentations given and have some thoughts that connects to most every one of them. Starting with our chairman, program chair, that talk about evolution. I think, as a person that have enjoyed studying evolution as well as complex system dynamics, it's a given that evolution means change. But change in it itself does not guarantee that you end up at a more optimal place. That's a very important aspect of complex system dynamics, is that there are potentially many local equilibria, and it takes deliberate design and taking into account the complex energetics of a system in order to be sure that you're at a more optimal place, never mind the global optimal place. So with that said, I think when considering quality, I think there are some very important aspects that must be taken into account that is a reflection of real-world complexity. A few months ago at PNSQC, I had a very nice chat with Ward Cunningham, who was one of the original author of the Agile Manifesto. And I went up to him and we crossed paths at Tektronix Labs. We didn't really knew each other back then. And that was a long time ago when I worked there myself. I went up to him and I say, the Agile Manifesto remind me of another manifesto. He said, what? You mean the Communist Manifesto? I say, yeah. And then he thought about it for a second and he said, sure. And what do I mean by that, and what does he mean in agreement with me saying that? Is that obviously when we look at countries that have attempted to experiment with communism, and I'm thinking about the Soviet Union and not China, it didn't work out very well, the Eastern Bloc countries and the Soviet Union, partly because the experimentation really did not take into account real human complexity. And so that's kind of my point number one, is that in evolving the quality culture of an organization, one must take into account real-world complexity, specifically complexity associated with human nature. In my work, I'm the statewide quality assurance program manager for the state of Oregon. I work with many agencies who has to do major IT projects and have to work with big consulting firms, small development firms, and so forth. I can say without reservation that the perspective of the development organization, especially one that's out for profit, is very different from the acquiring organization. And Phil and I put together a paper in the last PNSQC specifically talking about how when you outsource a project, you need to take into account these considerations that are fundamentally important and needs to be differentiated between the development organization and the acquiring organization. So with that said, what are some of the other real world complexity? Certainly organization, culture is a very important aspect. One cannot talk about evolving quality culture without taking into account the specific industry that you work in, whether it's a small organization, a large organization, or just the meaning of quality itself needs to be carefully articulated. So, I have the pleasure in my career having worked in Fortune 500 company, startups, private sector, public sector, organization with a few people, organizations with tens of thousands of people. And one thing I am completely convinced is that it's a lot easier to be engaging in quality improvement when an organization of course, have a quality mindset, but more importantly, have known reference model with respect to what it means by maturing yourself. Whether it's a maturity scale in a software organization, people might use CMM, maybe there's one possible model which is now not as fashionable as people talking about agile. And then the other aspects, of course, with organizational culture is to what extent do you need to be complying with a good deal of regulations, you know. It is very easy to bring a well-meaning group of people together, develop and innovate, and have a system that does not comply with regulatory requirements. That is one of the important failure mode in government, is that very good system, technically successful, does not meet business needs. So the second aspects of quality that we have to take into account when it comes to talking about culture is national culture. About a year and a half ago, I was in Hong Kong, and I work for the Office of the State CIO. Hong Kong is like a special administrative region of China, and they have an Office of Government CIO, which would be like our counterpart, or a kind of sister organization, if you may. They were very gracious. They hosted me for half a day, and we sat around talking about mutual challenges in different areas. And one thing that we like to talk about during that half a day was development life cycle. Like us, they use a lot of contractors to do very big projects, and some worked out very well, some not so well. And with that said, one common topics of interest to us were the use of Agile. So, like the state of Oregon, they have a lot of consultants. Some are from internationally renowned firms. And then they have a lot of personnel that were trained overseas, very familiar with the paradigm of Agile. And then we asked each other, how's it working out for you? Not so well. And part of the common challenges in using Agile in government is it's not so good when you're dealing with major contracts with large firms. That's one thing. And the second thing is that a lot of time your stakeholders, internal stakeholders, may not really be empowered to represent the organization very well. They may be a little bit resistant to change on the one hand, but also inevitably they're expert of the very processes and operating paradigms that needs to be changed out. So that's another kind of fundamental issues when it comes to internal subject matter expertise. Then at the end of the conversation, one guy kind of bursted out in a very funny kind of way, and he said, but it's not even consistent with the Chinese culture. So that thought kind of stuck in my mind is that, and I think Ward Cunningham would agree with that, is that some of the real world dynamics that simply were not taken into account when the Agile Manifesto was written by the renowned authors of this manifesto was not just organizational dynamics, but those things that has to do with national culture. And I think these are things we all have to take into account when we try to evolve the quality culture of our respective organizations. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thanks, Ying. Okay, well, that wraps up today. I think that Ying offered us a great perspective. We've certainly gone wide and high and low in terms of a culture of quality. I think to close it off, they used to say that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think, maybe that's a little bit true still today, but I think what's more true is that it's not what you know, but what you can learn and who you can become based on what you learn. And that is the platform that PNSQ provides for the software quality community, is a platform for learning. We are opening our call for papers today, and so that'll be open until the middle of April. So it would be great to hear from you guys that submit a paper, and our conference is on October 14th, so we'll see you in October. Thanks very much.